To order and start with the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. 1.02 approval of agenda. Do we have a motion?
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Discussion on the agenda. Seeing and hearing nothing, we will proceed with a vote.
AJ? If everyone would unmute for a minute. AJ, you're still muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes. So,
Yeah. Vote
yes. Angie?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Kim Marie?
Yes.
Andy? Andy?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. 1.03 approval of minutes. We've got minutes from the March 24th meeting. Motion.
I move the board adopt the meeting minutes of March 24th, 2020.
Second.
Discussion on the minutes. Seeing and hearing nothing, we'll proceed with a vote.
AJ?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Kim Marie?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, we'll move right into the study session then and begin with 2.01 cabinet reports. Dr. Tucker.
Yeah, so the first thing that we wanted to just provide you with is an update from our cabinet areas. We know that we have an academic services item as well as a budget outlook piece. So we'll hear a little bit more from academic services and finance. But wanted to take a minute to offer up an update from HR, from operations, as well as business services. So we'll get this morning started with Dr. Vogelaar.
Thank you very much. In terms of human resources, obviously a big part of our work right now is just making sure we're taking care of employees, keeping track of employees who are on leave or had leave scheduled that now they're on call. They don't need leaves unless they need to be duty free, and just kind of managing that. So Christelle has done quite a bit, just readying the team with regard to the changes that the CARES Act and the Family First Coronavirus Recovery Act have done in terms of just game changing our routine. So that's been a big part of our work. Obviously, there are some positions that still need to be filled. Liberty Oaks Elementary School needs a head principal, so working with Andrea Dixon Seahorn to do that work. We met, in fact, she and I both met virtually with the leadership team there at Liberty Oaks to really start compiling the data of non-negotiables and like-to-haves that they want in their next principal, so that we can build a criteria that would apply to that candidate pool. So there's some of that. By and large, though, most of the positions are kind of on hold, not just in Liberty, but across the profession around the greater Kansas City area. Everybody's kind of hitting the pause button, reevaluating their position vacancy before they move too deep in that. So HR's engaged in that as well. And then obviously with Cindy Sullivan also just readying for this Team Liberty meeting on Thursday, revisiting the conversation about the recommendations for compensation plans for next year is a big part of that as well. And that will be followed by a meeting with the administrative salary and welfare team as well. So that's the work in a nutshell that HR has been engaged in over the last couple of weeks. Thank you.
Any questions related? Can everybody hear me okay?
You broke up a little bit.
Okay. Any questions of Dr. Vogelaar related to human resources then this morning?
Thank you.
Okay, the next up, we will hear from operations, Mr. Anderson.
Good morning, everybody. Everybody hear me okay?
Morning.
I've got a couple things I wanted to cover. First, I'd start with our meal plans and that routine, which is up and operating quite well. To date, we have served a little over 18,000 meals to the district kids. And in addition to that, we've really picked up our delivery system as well. And then just as of yesterday, we included meal kits from the Pleasant Valley Liberty United Methodist project with harvesters and kind of that back snack program, working with the social workers and counselors. And so we delivered 90 of those as well yesterday. So that's really kind of up and running in full force. Appreciate all the various departments that have been involved in that. Transportation, Jason Brighton, warehouse purchasing, the nutrition services folks, of course, amongst many others. I did want to call out Misty Newland, who's the Assistant Director of Nutrition Services. She's been really spearheading and coordinating much of the work at kind of that higher level and has really done great work in pulling all that together. One other thing I did want to mention, and one of the things that she's been really focusing on, trying to stay a few steps ahead or a few weeks ahead to make sure we have sufficient quantities and we can kind of keep the operation moving. She's fairly confident that we're in good shape right now. And is securing product as we speak. But she did say at some point, because right now, as you know, we're offering up to all families, all students at no cost, I should say. And so a lot of students and families are taking full advantage of that, which is fine. At some point, if we run into some quantities issues, we may need to try to message kind of the focus on the free and reduced kids, which was really the initial focus out of the gate. So just wanted to kind of put that on your radar. So that's that with respect to the meal delivery system. One other thing that we've been working quite a bit at is access to our facilities. To date, we've decided to keep the facilities open and hoping that our residents and patrons respect kind of the social distancing requirements pulled out of the CDC. We do have active security folks patrolling the district between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. And they will regularly check on the facilities. And if they see something that is not compliant, they'll intervene and kind of request that they move along. So we're going to keep that as is, but we will be messaging something shortly to kind of really articulate what our goals are with respect to keeping them open for the time being. I've also just kind of anecdotally have kind of been out quite a bit and have seen so many good, proper, safe, appropriate uses of the track and even of the fields that I know you see families using it, you see individuals. And so I think there are a lot of people that are really leaning on those for the time being. So we're going to do our best to keep them open for now. One other thing, I guess, kind of related to that, we have established a district security line. And we'll roll that out here in the next couple of days, where it's 736 and then 7777 will get you directly to whoever's on call at that moment. So if there is an issue or a concern, that can be reported and they can then respond. One weak spot is weekends. Obviously, we don't have them working weekends, at least right now. And we've been in conversations with the police department and our partnership with the SRO program. We're hoping that they can step up a little bit over the weekends to help us out. One other thing I would just mention on that is even if we did close them, because they are all very open campuses, it's really difficult to truly lock them down and close them. And so you have to bear in mind that it's kind of easier said than done just to make them off limits. Construction, quickly pivoting to that. If you've been back there, they're continuing to make great progress on the PAC project. And there are full crews out there right now. Right out of the gate, as we were pivoting to these new standards being shared by both the City of Liberty and Kansas City, we were in close contact with our construction management team about what is permitted, what is allowed. And right now they can continue working. So it is permissible, obviously respecting those guidelines. And to date, they've managed to keep most of the crews on site and kind of working pretty hard at keeping us on schedule. I will just be really blunt. It's going to be a super close call getting us up and running by mid-August, but we're doing our best right now to stay on track for that. associated to that, we have a bid opening this week, Thursday, for the 800s project. So that's kind of backfilling once Fine Arts vacates its current space, kind of getting into the 800s within Liberty High School and working on that space. We're going to be really carefully timing and coordinating that so we don't, get ahead of ourselves in the 800s and then wind into some issues at the PAC. So just wanted to make you aware that we're closely monitoring that. And then the last thing, I've had several folks reach out, including a couple board members. We have been working really closely on some projects, I think, that are great ideas and initiatives with respect to maybe using some of our equipment that we have, whether it be 3D printers, sewing machines, or even donating some of the supplies that we may have in excess. And so we've done some of that. I'm sure you've seen that. The two things that we're working on right now, one, it looks like just as of last night, we got some clearance. Liberty Hospital is in contact with Kathy Ellemeyer, has requested that our teams with the 3D printers begin fabricating the mask kind of holders. So not the mask, but the holders. And so Kathy is going to be getting with Julie here and to kind of help coordinate the fabrication of those devices. We're also looking at and working with the FACS teachers with potential sewing opportunities and in preparing cloth face masks, potentially for staff in our teams, but also maybe even beyond that. So we're kind of working slowly through that to make sure we have capacity. There's the need. We don't disrupt supply chains in a really kind of, a way we don't want to. And so there's a lot of parts to that, but we continue to work through all that and just wanted to keep you posted. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Steve, I have a question.
Yeah.
Kansas City schools had to suspend or cancel their nutrition program as a result of one of the, I think, staff members has COVID-19. I think that's what it was. Do we have any alternative plans if that would happen to us?
We do. Great question. We have kind of right out of the gate, we had these conversations with Clay County Health and getting their guidance in terms of what do we do, really not if it happens, when it happens. So we're assuming that it will happen. So we have some pretty specific guidelines to follow. And as of right now, we're confident that we can keep the operation moving. What they're telling us is we can relocate to a different kitchen, go through some cleaning protocols, obviously take care of that staff person. But they're also highly protected in what they're doing and how they're preparing and serving the food. So as of right now, in accordance with the guidance from the county, we have a plan in place to keep that moving.
Thank you.
Welcome.
One of my
Yeah,
two
Steve,
questions.
I'll say it was, go ahead, Andy, sorry.
I was going to say that was one of my two questions. The other one I had was in regards to our facilities. I've observed for myself at Heritage that people are not using them in a socially distant manner. And I see on social media multiple reports almost daily of teenagers at both high schools not. And so I think that, in my opinion, we need to do more because people aren't honoring this. They need some stricter guidelines, I think. I think we need to look at what the city did with their parks. And from what I can tell, a lot of people are not using the parks now that were before. It's going to be the same problem with enforcement that the city's going to have. But I think that once that's out there, that they're not to be used, people honor that versus sort of on their own honor system.
Right. Yeah, I think I guess we're certainly open to other approaches here. I think the first thing we realize is we've not really been very good, or if at all, have communicated very specifically what the expectations are. So we're planning to do that today or tomorrow. And as I mentioned, I think our security team that last week, they were kind of doing it kind of intermittently, and now they're doing it kind of more kind of part of a regular patrolling process. And I'm getting daily reports during both shifts. And so I'm hoping that using both strategies that will help kind of tamp this down. But of course, if it's not working, then we can certainly redirect and just shut everything down completely. I do think there will be some backlash to that, and maybe that's fine. But if we just lock down all of our facilities completely, I think you'll have some backlash there.
I'm backlash. I'd rather have that than a bunch of positive tests because we didn't do something.
Yeah.
And I think that's the eventual end goal if this intermittent piece doesn't help with that. And so we've had those conversations and know of some districts that have done that and gone so far as to put snow fences around all of their playgrounds. At the same time, if this piece helps monitor that along the way and our safety and security team are able to curb that utilization as far as the group use, we'll report back to the board and keep everyone apprised of that, and as well as whether or not we feel we need to take it to that next step. So good feedback. Other questions for Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, Steve, so kids and I tried out the nutrition service program. It was awesome. Kudos to the team, the way everything is set up logistically and worked really smoothly. My other question on that, because I think I remember seeing where we had planned on, charging students who were not free and reduced. I think that obviously has gone out the window. Is that more of it's going to be difficult to process payments or during that time frame, and let's just keep the line moving, or is that something that we intentionally did to just offer it up for everybody?
Well, before we actually launched it, when we were doing the preparation work, it looked like that was indeed the case, that we were going to have to pay people kind of in accordance where they were currently aligned within the payment system. And then, in fact, our first draft before we released kind of the message of what the program plan was going to look like included that note. The day before, we had guidance from DESE that was not going to be the case, and basically anybody under 18, regardless of status, would receive a free meal. And so that's the way we've been doing it since the beginning. And there have been we've had a couple people reach out and kind of challenge that from parent, like said, well, that wasn't the case, and I've looked into, there were a couple situations that first week. And I couldn't figure out or find any situation where there was a gap in our system. Our folks were saying, no, they understood, and they weren't even asking questions or looking for IDs from students. They were just keeping the line moving. Mm-hmm. And so you'd have a family come in with maybe one kid saying, I've got 3 other kids at home and I'd like meals for 2 more days. And they were just giving that away. So, but yeah, initially that was the issue, but then we had guidance from DESE that all those meals would be covered.
So with that said, is the issue of where we may need to focus on free and reduced kids in our messaging, is it a supply issue from, our vendors?
Potentially.
Okay.
So right now it's okay, but what we're seeing is it keeps growing. And if you've seen the charts, the data, it keeps growing and growing. And so I think just always staying ahead of that a little bit. Now it'll make a difference if some other districts are dropping out of that supply chain. And like I said, right now, she's pretty confident. She's got a couple weeks ahead in terms of lead time. So I think we're okay for right now. I just wanted to kind of share that at some point, if this goes and goes and goes into the summer, that might be something we need to look at.
Yep, that's great.
And I will say one other thing, I think I mentioned this in one of the updates, is that there was a rumor out there that first week, and I think it was coming from the Shoal Creek community, that they had heard that the more families that could get in and use the system, even if they didn't have the need, the better off it was for the district, because they kept the drivers employed, they kept the nutrition services folks employed. And so I had to respond to that and basically say that that's not the case. And so we wanted to make sure that people weren't doing it for that reason. And I think that was part of, at least initially, some of the confusion.
The other thing I would say on the nutrition services piece is if we were to tighten it in terms of the number of students served that are free and reduced lunch, obviously working with DESE as well as federal requirements to be able to do that. The other thing that you have to put in place is how to be able to trap other families that, from a qualifying event standpoint, might then now qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so it's just a matter of filling out that paperwork, getting that to us. And so we anticipate, as this is prolonged, you may end up with additional families that now have free and reduced lunch status. So it's not just relegated to those prior families that existed on our free and reduced lunch lists, to be able to open that up to someone that may have a qualifying event, whether it be unemployment, job loss, hospitalization, whatever the case may be. So Other questions for Stephen? Okay. Thanks, Mr. Anderson. Next up then, as far as business services, Ms. Sullivan.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good to see you all. Business services operating as usual, as unusual. We're continuing to pay bills and payroll just like normal. I will say finally last week the mail, the number of invoices coming in did taper off just a little bit. So I expect that to continue as we catch up with paying the majority of the invoices that are out there. But they're doing a phenomenal job working remotely and connecting with other district staff members to get their jobs done under less than ideal circumstances, as everyone is, but I'm really proud of them for the work that they're doing. We're also working on the budget. Remotely has proved really to be a challenge, working with so many different people across the district to try and get those pieces pulled together, but it will be coming together nicely. We're also looking, as I've told you in my updates, at the state budget situations, including pending legislation if they do ever get back together, which they will have to in June to approve the state budget. But we're still monitoring that for the revenue, which we'll talk about in the next section of the meeting. We're also looking at the legislation around the CARES Act and what that means for our employees as we try to continue sustaining and supporting our staff. And that's with all of the FMLA and the sick leave and other things that we support them with through HR, as Bob indicated. We're also looking into some possible public assistance through FEMA and applying to that grant portal in case we do decide that we want to go that route for getting additional funding. And also we're keeping our eyes on what the federal stimulus is going to look like. As soon as we know what the state of Missouri is going to get, we can probably calculate pretty close to what our portion of any federal stimulus is going to be, and then figuring out what we have to do to spend it, what we can spend it on, what we can't spend it on, and tracking all of that, just like back in the days of the RS stimulus. There are sometimes a lot of restrictions on what we can and can't do with that. So anything that comes out about that, we're tracking that and trying to figure out how we're going to navigate that when we do get that. But everything's rolling along, and I'm feeling pretty good about things in the business office.
Any questions of Cindy on the business services side?
Yeah, the one question I'd have is, as we're going through kind of all of this process, have we found any expenses that we can either reduce or eliminate based on us just not using them at this point?
Every contract or every invoice that does come through, they are looking at to make sure it's a service that is continuing. Most of our contracts are fee for services. So if we're not using it, we're not paying for it. But Jeanette Westfall has been very diligently looking at the academic services contracts to make sure that there aren't things there that we shouldn't be paying for, but that's on our mind every time we pay a bill to make sure it should be paid.
Good, thank you.
Other questions of Cindy? The only other item I would add, and I think you've seen this in our Friday, our daily updates, is in and around some of our education partners, be it MASA, MOASBO, MSBA, or some of our financial partners like Stiefel Nicholas, different groups like that are providing financial information to us, be it locally at the state level or that federal outlook, and really just pouring into that to see what we can glean from that information as well, to inform where we're at, but then also to inform next fiscal year about budgets. So we see quite a bit of that, participate in a variety of webinars and conference calls just to be able to get up to speed, and as well as connect with our peer districts just to kind of get a sense of what they're hearing if there's something that we're missing along the way. So I appreciate Cindy and her team for staying close to that. Questions of Cindy before we move on? Okay. The only items that I had, 3 quick items just to put on your radar. I believe we shared with you the Let's Talk portal that now sits on our district's webpage. If you've not had an opportunity to kind of peruse that, please visit that, just kind of see how it works. Right now, it is set up specifically for questions to be answered, comments and feedback to be received around our current school closure and the shelter in place. So it's a lot of coronavirus related information, as well as, how can I get food assistance? How can I help? What do I need as far as flexible learning for my kids? Along with just general feedback or general questions. So we're starting to see an increase of that as we pushed that out late last week. And so thus far, I think we were up to about 30 different inquiries yesterday, which is good. We're able to take those questions and then be able to push them out to the appropriate people to assist in responding. Another component of that we're able to do is to monitor our turnaround time. And how quickly did it take someone to close the loop on that question or that comment or that feedback? But then on the user side, on the user experience, it allows you to also rate how that information was provided for you. Was it timely? Was it the appropriate information, the adequate response? And so thus far, we've watched that, and even just in a short period of time, on a scale of 10, we have like a 9.8 rating thus far on those 30 inquiries. So we'll be able to watch that, report that out periodically as we continue to use the system. But thus far, so far it seems to be working pretty well. We're still getting acclimated to it as well. The next thing that I would say on the communication front to take that a step farther is we worked with the academic services team over the weekend, really. On Friday, pushed out a survey to teachers, to staff, as well as to parents. We're already seeing significant responses from our staff and our parents. I've yet to see the student side, but that's forthcoming. So as we get that information, then we will put that in an executive summary and share that with the board. We feel like we've had a pretty good start in these first 2 weeks, but we want to ensure that we're getting the feedback and hearing from our community during this unique time. So we think that that survey data and feedback received will help us shape really what the next 3 weeks looks like for our teachers, parents, and students. But then beyond that, in the event that we're closed for the remainder of the school year, what can we be doing along the way to be able to respond accordingly to our family, our teacher, and our students' needs? So we look forward to sharing that with you. The last thing that I wanted to share was on Thursday, this coming Thursday, we do have a call with the governor's office in terms of the governor's advisory committee. I don't have a sense yet as to what that agenda will entail. We do have some questions for him, but that is something that we will be monitoring in terms of the conversation, the dialogue, any decisions that come out of that. We'll certainly push that to the board in an update. So those are my brief items, unless there are any questions from the board of me. Anything? Okay, I think that's it, Mr. Rothman.
I don't hear any questions, so we will move on to 2.02 academic services update.
So we're going to shift briefly over to the academic services update, and you should have, I'm going to take over your screen. Can everyone see board docs there? Okay. So we're going to turn this over to our academic services team to kind of walk us through their presentation this morning. We just asked them to be able to give an overview, perhaps of where we've been the last couple of weeks, kind of where we're currently at, as well as what the next several weeks look like, but then also by department, by elementary, secondary, curriculum, instruction, special programs, special ed, and that this team has been working incredibly hard with coaches, with teachers, with principals to be able to take care of students and teachers for the transition to school at home. So we're going to turn it over to, I think, Dr. Moore to get us started, and then they'll tag team back and forth throughout this presentation.
Actually, Dr. Tucker, Dr. Seahorn will open up the presentation this morning. Can everyone hear me?
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We decided to kind of divide and conquer our charge this morning to give you an update on where we are with flexible extended learning. And so before we get started, we wanted to open up with this very powerful quote that you should see on your screens. Relationships before rigor, grace before grades, patience before programs and love before lessons. We thought that that was a great way to capture where we've been, where we are, and where we're going at this time in a teaching and learning virtual space. So I'm going to open up with where we've been. Dr. Moore will then follow with where we are, and then Dr. Westfall will end with where we're going, as well as some special reports. So, in sharing with you just a brief overview of where we've been at the elementary level, as you may know, we were able to build upon the choice boards that were offered initially when we had that initial inclement weather day, and that's where we first introduced flexible learning. So we learned some valuable lessons from that, and then from there, we extended the choice boards to each grade level, and we even went so far as to make sure at the pre-K level that student choice was made available. So with the pre-K choice board, it was Think, Tech, Go. And so there were reading activities for students, constructive play opportunities, music and physical movement experiences, and then other math lessons and other lessons that would pertain to the core academic areas. And then for grades K through 5, the theme was Think, Tech, Touch. There were required activities that were laid out for students by grade level, as well as some optional experiences that they could choose to work on. And again, it addressed the core academic content areas. And as you can see here, we provided some daily iReady lessons for them. There was Scholastic Learn at Home, Reflex, Zern for math, Mystery Science, virtual field trips, nonfiction articles for them to read, opportunities to learn code. And so we received a lot of positive feedback regarding the choices that students were given, and then also the structure that was provided by things that they needed to do on a daily basis and things that they could choose to do on their own. As we moved into the secondary realm, the focus really for these first 2 weeks was a strong emphasis on building relationships, making connections with students and their families. The emphasis was also on continuing to stress with the relationships, grace being given to students, flexibility on the staff end and on the student end, and trying to also be sensitive to the needs of students who are now seniors. There was a flexible learning day checklist that previously was developed. Again, when we offered the initial flexible learning day due to the inclement weather. So we learned lessons from that as well and refined that document with some input and insight from our innovation and learning coaches and working with principals, trying to ensure that there would be a balance of time spent on coursework as well as self-care for students. And then these grading conversations is really an ongoing conversation for us now, with the emphasis really being right now on just giving students the appropriate feedback on where they are in their learning, but then also continuing to put emphasis on student learning and engagement rather than compliance. And then as we think about where we've been for the first 2 weeks with regards to curriculum, instruction, and professional development, Google Meets was identified as the primary platform for teachers to conduct student video conferences. We also have identified Zoom as a platform as well, taking into account the additional security measures that need to be put in place to ensure that our students are safe. Technology connections for all students were identified and solved with hotspots and devices being delivered to homes. Also, professional learning for staff and for parents have been made available during these first 2 weeks through our various vendors, as well as our library media specialists. And with regard to curriculum, again, pre-K through 12, it was determined by our design teams, and also taking into consideration the adjustment that we've needed to make for our students with specialized needs, whether they're English language learners, our special education students, and even the needs of our students within our gifted programs. And then wrapping it up in a bow, our innovation and learning coaches continue to meet with teachers and teams to support the learning throughout this transition. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Moore, who's going to again speak to us about an overview for our next 2 weeks.
think actually, Andrea, I might take it from here. The
No
just
problem.
wanted to talk. That's okay. Just wanted to chat about really what we're looking at as we transitioned into this week, and talking through the changes that we've had since we've worked on our flex boards. So in elementary, starting in week 3, we worked to allow our teachers to pick back up where they were in their academic time with their classrooms. So Dr. Seaborn worked with principals, and they are currently identifying what the big rocks are for teaching and learning at each grade level by building, and helping ensure that we're focusing on our curriculum. We still, at this point, offer choice to our teachers for where they are and how they bundle learning by semester. And so we're just asking for them to let us know where they are and what they're identified as their essential learning focus as we move into the next few weeks. In secondary, we are just continuing the plan that we had to start. It's just extended. We're definitely focusing on making sure that we monitor the level of work that we're asking for our students to do, and guiding our teachers into more of a bigger picture of learning instead of transactional behavior. And so that we've tackled pretty well, and I feel like we're definitely over the mountain on that one, just making sure that people understand how this impacts our students at home, and how we can make sure we hold the rigor at the same time as we monitor the amount of work. The big really challenge that we're in right now, and this is not just Liberty Public Schools, but this is a national situation, is how our students show evidence of their learning, because as you know, there are many school districts around us that are closing school for the rest of the year. And so we're just trying to recognize that we're monitoring our learning through fairly standard grading procedures that were created in a system of face-to-face learning. And so we're now trying to figure out how to deliver our essential standards and our core academics in this virtual world, and how the students can present that learning to us. So we're using the platforms that we have with Seesaw. We're taking monitoring progress through our iReady, and that's through K-8. And then we're using our proficiency reporting guide in elementary so that the teachers can see the progress that we need to make based on the essential standards that we identified early. Also, you heard Dr. Seahorn say earlier that we're using Google Meet and Zoom to make sure that we have those contacts with our students. And I believe that our teachers are just really finding pretty innovative ways to create lessons and gather student evidence so that they can see what they're learning, as opposed to just, landing in a paper pencil transactional way. And then last but not least, just kind of to round up this process, we're really focusing on the feedback, like Dr. Tucker said, that we're getting from our stakeholders, because we don't want improvement to feel like it has to be in a 2-week segment, but that we can respond to what our stakeholders are asking for us. So we're definitely looking at that, especially now that we've gotten the feedback from the surveys. Next. Just in finishing the school year out, we're really considering some options. What does it look like if we can give students some ownership in their learning and really focus on some passion things or things that they wanted to learn, and how does that meet inside the classroom with our teachers? We are researching grading practices and connecting with our students to see how they feel about it, and what is their input to how we can measure learning, because this is definitely something that is new to us along the way. And then we're continuing to share that consistent message that we're all in this together. We're trying to figure this out. And supporting everybody along the way, just making sure that everyone knows there's no right answer right now. We're really trying to support each other and hold each other up and meet the needs where we can. And at this point, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Moore.
Okay, thank you. We just wanted to also give a couple of updates on special education and special programs, as well as summer school. So Dr. Martin has worked tirelessly with the special education department, process coordinators, teachers, principals to ensure that our students are getting the services and that they are continuing to work toward their goals that they have set in their IEPs. So she has had meetings with principals to ensure that they know what the expectation is for teachers. And then the principals have met with the teachers to make sure that they feel comfortable. It is a lot of work to try to figure out how to do this virtually, but they are working to ensure that they're giving a good faith effort and that students are getting the time that is required through their IEP. So continuing to work on that. As far as special programs is concerned, Dr. Meisenheimer as well has done a wonderful job securing all the different areas that she comes in contact with. So she's working with counselors, social workers to ensure the delivery of food kits. We're working, seal by literacy. Students are taking the test from home and will be able to complete retakes as well there. Continuing to give students individual therapy sessions through the Children's Service Fund, making sure that students who have 504s are getting service that way as well as they can be. She has given, you can see an FAQ document, and that's been given to principals to share with staff as well, just to make sure that we are in compliance with servicing students who have a 504. And then for students who are on homebound, just working with them to ensure that they're getting the same education that everyone else is. And then you can see some notes on gifted, that they're working through the transition meetings, and that elementary has worked with the families to ensure that those students are getting their gifted minutes. And then finally, summer school. We're not really sure what that will look like. Hopefully we will have something in the next couple of weeks to tell us what, if we will have a normal summer school. But we have been working with Christopher Hand just to come up with some different options. And that could be what our current plan is. That should say 424. But if we return that, this is what it would look like, that we would maybe just have credit recovery for the high school and then ESY for special education. We could do a virtual summer school. K-12, we could look at doing something in July or something in June and July. It just really depends on what the state does and where we are with our stay-at-home order. So more to come on that. And with that, we will take any questions that you all have for academic services.
Any questions?
I have a question. My question is to school districts closing. Is any observation as to why they're choosing that route? Is there something that's going on differently with those schools, or is it financial?
I think part of that reference is in respect to Kansas making the decision early on to close for the remainder of the school year. They made that decision back in March, pretty early through the governor's office, whereas in Missouri, we've not done that. In terms of Jeff City making that decision for us, we have seen about 3 that I know of, school districts closer to the St. Louis side. Wright City, I believe, is one that kind of led the way in terms of going ahead and making the decision to close school or transition to online learning for the remainder of the school year. And so last I heard, there were about 3 of those districts that have done that. My sense, though, is that every district in the state of Missouri is continuing some type of learning from home experience. What we have seen, and I think this was shared out in either a Friday update or one of the daily updates or last time we met, and doing some surveying across the state, there is a significant disparity from metropolitan districts to urban districts to rural districts and accessibility, both to Wi-Fi, internet, but then also to devices. So some are doing pushing out packets, pen and paper packets to be able to complete. Others are able to facilitate one-on-one or one-to-one environments, as we're seeing in Liberty. I don't know of any districts in Missouri that have just cut off their school year effective at the time of that closure, albeit there are some districts in the country that have done that. I've not seen any in Missouri make that decision. Is there anything else to add to that, Dr. Moore?
No, you're spot on.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. Other questions of academic services? David?
Yeah, this may be a little bit of a premature question, but and I know you're talking to the governor, but a lot of the focus so far has been on what happens in the next 2 weeks or through the end of this year, or we're starting to think about summer school. I guess I'm wondering what the scenarios are and the probabilities for August, and whether, are they seeing that it's a 50% chance that we'll have to roll into the fall with a modified schedule of some sort, 20% chance, and how do you start to spend the next couple of months then preparing for that? Financial stuff aside, which I know Cindy's going to talk about in a second, but just do we need to figure out how to amplify what's going on already, and try and spend the next couple months getting into that? Or does the governor say, we're going to be back in session and the science supports that?
I don't think that's a premature question. I don't have a premature answer for you, though. I wish I did. But
we've heard plenty of premature answers. I don't need those.
That is a piece that we have thought about and talked about. And so then, like anybody, you can open any newspaper and see projections and the lifespan of all of this, right?
Right.
Nonetheless, you have to be planning for scenario A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then some. Probably a good example of that, it's kind of that short-term, mid-term, long-term, and trying to compartmentalize some of those questions and what you need to be thinking of ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we think midterm, that midterm space right now is, what does summer school look like? Either in a face-to-face experience or in a virtual opportunity. And so you saw some of those scenarios that were listed. Or what does kind of a incremental easing look like, where you start getting back to some sense of normalcy, where families are going back to work? Well, then we have to respond pretty quickly with some type of a child care program. So being able to turn on Kids Zone quickly and bring kids in and support kids and families as far as the child care piece. So then fast forward to that longer term in August, if we're still in this environment and it's shut down and it's virtual, one of the pieces you have to think about is, okay, we've got to matriculate students over to the next grade, move their schedules over. And so that creates a tremendous amount of questions and issues and work to be done in terms of ensuring that happens and that happens well. So from the state standpoint, we really don't have a sense of a percentage that will be back in August that we could hear. We may get some of that later this week as they perhaps share some of their data and some of their projections. Again, we've seen all sorts of projections that have it, peaking in the next several weeks, but then into May or maybe not until June. So we'll continue to monitor that and stay engaged and try to focus both on what's immediately facing us, what is that midterm, and then what are those long-term issues we need to be thinking about.
We started the conversation with relationship, and it's one thing if you've spent 7 months together already in the last 2, you need to shift to a remote strategy, but it's a completely different thing if you've got to start a fresh second grade year without knowing the teacher, the people, the classmates, all that.
The other thing that I would share is, even if you had a traditional start, let's say August 25th, first day of school that we have scheduled on our calendar, that start looks different having gone through what we've just gone through or continuing to go through because now you're really talking about teachers having to facilitate two pieces. Yeah, you're going to have kids that are face to face, but you never know when this could happen again, or you have a second round of the coronavirus, which some people are projecting might happen in the fall or early winter. And so really it's now a mindset of, as a teacher, I have to be ready for that face-to-face classroom environment, but then I also have to be equipped to be able to switch quickly to that online learning, distance learning from home. So as we think about new teachers coming into our system, or who are going to be in college, hopefully higher ed is focusing on some of those pieces as well. But I know that as we onboard our teachers, it's going to be, hey, here's what we just went through. You need to be equipped as a new teacher on how to navigate this. And of course, we're going to support you along the way to get there.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Other questions of academic services?
Yeah, I want to give a kudos to the entire team. With 3 elementary kids, I've seen the exponential growth in that first week of really trying to figure everything out, and then the second week just being dramatically different and a lot smoother. So kudos to the team on all of that. The one question I have is roughly how many students have we not had contact with that have kind of gone missing?
I would like to speak to that just at the elementary level. We have been having those conversations, and we've identified roughly 20 to 25 families. This was as of about last Thursday. I will be conducting a Zoom meeting with principals on today, and they will give me some final numbers. And we do have kind of a tentative plan of what to do with the families that have been, as we refer to as, just unresponsive. We know that there may be just some extenuating circumstances going on with those families where we just are not able to reach them by way of the primary contact that's in Power School or even the emergency contacts. So once we get that final count, we'll be working with the operations department on ways that we can possibly deploy the security team to assist us with helping us to just maybe knock on doors and just make sure the families are okay.
Would say from a secondary level, my team has done an amazing job of reaching out to the families. Some schools at the very first week just called or emailed all the families. Others have gone by, who we haven't heard from. So as of right now, I emailed them again last night and asked for those numbers, and almost everybody has responded already and said, we're good. We've made contact with everyone. I think we'll probably be on less than 2 hands of the number of students that we have not heard from for the secondary, which is great. Liberty Academy has, been doing meetings with their kids individually, which is cool, with all the teachers and then their one student, just to give them some individual attention. But they've all reached out and done a great job.
Great, thank you.
And on a related note, I think in one of our updates, we shared with you accessibility, and we were waiting for some hotspots to come in. We've since received those. Khajiit hotspots is what they're called, and I've distributed those, or in the process of distributing those. We have a couple of extras. And then, as I'm sure you're aware, Verizon and Sprint recently flipped on hotspots as far as cell phone utilization. So I would say we're not 100% covered, but at the same time, if there's a family in need, by all means, we're able to come alongside them and support them and access not only the hotspots, but then also whatever technology needs they have at home by way of our tech department. So any final thoughts or questions for academic services?
I'm not sure it's for academic services, but this families in need question makes me curious. Is there anybody that's playing kind of a gathering role in our community for needs and people who can serve those needs? I've talked to a number of people who have capacity. They'd love to do something to help neighbors and people in our community. Anyone in our health department or church or
Jessica Meisenheimer has been collecting a list of families and has been working with the social workers to, families that they have been working with throughout the school year, and then asking the social workers to work with counselors and principals to reach out to make sure that those families are getting what they're needed, and then how also to reach out to them if they find themselves in a situation they haven't been in before and they actually need something that they haven't had to ask for. So she has actually a list of families that we're working with, and then we everybody just adds to that as needed.
And another layer to that was the draft of the community survey that we pushed out. We shared that with you last week in an update. And one of the questions that was posed in there were some mental health questions as far as how's your family doing, how is your student doing, and it had a scale that they could then rate. But then there were a lot of open-ended comments and opportunities in and around what do you need, how can we support you. So we'll likely see some feedback from that as well, that we can tailor that or target that individual respondent and hopefully link them up with whatever they've indicated. So. Jeanette?
And Dr. Tucker, on the student survey, we specifically asked students if there were any specific needs they had that were identified all the way down from anything from meals. So if the survey was reached by the student, we did collect the student ID number so that we could respond immediately.
And then the last thing to David's question would be if there are communities that reach out to you or us that want to get engaged or want to be involved or want to provide funding or donate their time, we would funnel all of that through Dr. Meisenheimer and then also through the Education Foundation. There are some opportunities there as well. And then also on our website related to the nutrition services and meal distribution, Pleasant Valley in their food kits distribution created a website that provides opportunities and lists of items that families can contribute that then they are taking and including in those food kits. So I know their congregation, for example, put together a 10 by 10 list. And so it's 10 items once a week through May 10th. And it's to compile those items from that list of groceries, non-perishable goods that they're trying to collect, and couple that with Harvester's supply, but then also Feed Northland Kids to be able to replenish those food kits along the way. So there's opportunity there as well. What else for academic services? Okay, thanks, David. Hey, thank you, ladies. There's a lot going on in academic services, so I appreciate the three of them as well as their entire team. Dr. Martin, Dr. Meisenheimer, Christopher Hand, a number of directors that I'm going to forget to mention, but they truly are keeping things humming along with their innovation and learning coaches. So that concludes that item, Mr. Rothman.
All right, we'll move right to 2.03 budget outlook 2020-21.
So similarly, I'm going to share our screen here and transition over to the budget services piece. We've actually asked Bob and Cindy and Steve to be able to kind of tag team this, with the bulk of it being budget outlook. So we'll start off with Cindy, but then we folded in operations as it relates to capital projects, and then also human resources as it relates to staffing areas. So Cindy?
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. As we've talked about all along, we know that this is very fluid at this point, more so than ever before when we've had these presentations. Today, we're going to fold in both the revenue and the expenditure piece, which we would normally have done in March and April in normal circumstances. But we're going to jump right in. The first slide that you see in front of you just is a brief total revenue picture of a typical year, where our sources come from and the distribution of those. And you can see normally total revenue are high on local and state, primarily with the majority coming from local. When we move to the next slide, that is just operating revenue. Typically the same sources, the only thing that changes is bond, and you pull out bond revenue because it goes into capital. And then that causes the percentages to sway to state a little more, but we still are heavy again on state and local, with local being 50% of our operating revenue and state bringing in 45% of our operating revenue. We're going to dissect all of those sources briefly. The next slide shows the local sources. And I'm giving you a 5-year history, 6-year history, 5-year history and projection for next year. And for our local and county sources, right now we're assuming with our projections, no change in the operating levy. With the CPI moving up to 2.3% in December, there is a chance that we could take pennies from debt service into the operating levy, but we won't know that until August when we have the tax rate hearing. So we budget based on no change in that levy. I am tentatively putting a 3% increase in assessed valuation. And when we get to the next slide, that will be explained a little more. But with the county working reduced hours, I haven't gotten much information about what we think the assessed value will do. It's a non-reassessment year. So in those years, we typically have a smaller rate of growth. So 3% may or may not make sense based on what I can hear from them when they respond back to requests for information. Our collection rate historically has been stable, even in times of turndown, which our lowest collection rate in any year has only been 98.45%, and that was back in 2009. So I feel pretty confident right now about our collection rate staying pretty good. One thing to note on the local and county sources is we're having a significant shift of pilots to current property tax if our information is correct. So that means Shoal Creek has a number of TIFT projects that are rolling off, they're expiring. So when that happens, the revenue then bumps up to new construction in FY21. But what also happens is that it then becomes distributed through operating, debt service, and capital. When we get a pilot, it goes all into operating, which is great. But then when you shift it up and the pilot falls off, we took about a $1.8 million hit to revenue in the operating side because it's distributed. So that's primarily why you see a downturn in the projected local and county revenue for next year. And then, of course, our interest earnings will decrease because the interest rate is next to nothing. So things that we don't know about what COVID-19 will do to local and county resources revolve around sales tax, tax protests, untimely payment of taxes, and then occupancy questions with the county and how they're levying based on occupancy. So there's still a lot of unknowns on that for next year, but we are projecting pretty conservatively there for local and county. The next slide shows you our assessed valuation percentage of change from 2001 to projected for this year. So you can see the recession of 2002, 2003 took a small dip. And then the Great Recession of 08, 09 is when the district actually went negative for 3 years with our assessed valuation change. So if you look at 2019, we had an 11.82% assessed valuation percentage of change. Then we drop it down to the 3% that tentatively I'm projecting for next year. And you note how that follows the Great Recession almost identically. So that's why I felt comfortable at this point even putting in any growth in assessed valuation. Again, when I hear more from the county, I'll know what to adjust that to. But I thought it was pretty interesting to see how that mirrors 08, 09. It scares me a little for 2021 if we continue to dip further. But that's all wait and see. So that's what we're looking at for local and county. On the state, which is the next slide, you will see a little bit of an increase in state revenue projected. We are pretty flat in our growth. The demographer is projecting 121 students for growth. So we will get a little bit of basic formula money for that. At this point, DESE is still saying no withholds. So that's all we can go on right now. I do anticipate we'll finish this year with no withholding at this point, but I don't know that I feel very good about full funding next year. But until they tell us something else, we have full funding baked in there. Another reason for the uptick in state revenue is historically for the past several years, we have booked $1.5 million of classroom trust fund into Fund 4 to boost our ability to tackle some capital projects. Next year, we are not booking any classroom trust fund into Fund 4. It's all going to be an operating, which also accounts for some of that increase in revenue there. Transportation is typically the first thing cut, that revenue is. We're not fully funded there right now. So we have budgeted it flat. I do not think that it will get the increase that's currently proposed in the state budget, and I would anticipate more withholdings from transportation funds, so we have cut that flat. Early childhood special education is mandatorily funded and has continued to be so. So we have put that full revenue based on what we spent last year into next year's budget. So hopefully that will keep continued being fully funded. So that's a quick look at the assumptions in our state budget. Next is the federal budget. You will see a projected downturn in that revenue, which has happened. This will be the third year in a row that our revenue has decreased. And we don't anticipate any increase in title program allocations because the census poverty rate decreased for the second year in a row in Liberty. I'll be interested to see if people do fill out their surveys, their census surveys, if that truly is the case next year. The only reason we would have any increase in federal revenue would probably be potential carryover from this year if we are not able to spend all of our federal program allocations due to the downturn here and the slowdown. Typically, since we're paying salaries with the majority of our title program allocations and IDE allocations, I anticipate that we should have very little to carry over. So I'm really believing that that will be a decrease in revenue. The thing that we don't have in here are stimulus funds. And that once, like I said earlier, we know what the state's allocation of stimulus funds are, we can calculate ours because that is going to be distributed based on the percentage of title funds to the whole state that a district gets. So as the government allows states to apply for that and then the states receive it, which should be 30 to 60 days, I believe, then we will know what kind of federal sources that we have. If we move on to the summary of our total revenue on the next slide, you will see that I've put in projected for the current year. Revenues, we're pretty tight on the revenues, so we've received most of the revenue that we are going to get other than the state payment. So we have projected this year for total revenue and operating revenue. You can see for 2021 that we have a slight decrease in total revenue, and that's primarily to the TIF expiring because operating decreases, but capital revenue will increase and debt service revenue will increase, which fold into total revenue. When you look at the operating revenue side, it is increasing primarily due to the classroom trust fund booked in Fund 1. But overall, you can see that total revenue and operating revenue are staying pretty flat as projected right now from the current year to the next year. Before I move on to expenditures, do you have any questions about the revenue picture? Okay, hearing none.
Oops, sorry, I was trying to unmute.
That's all right.
Cindy, I appreciate the fact that you are budgeting, kind of status quo from a state revenue perspective. I think, income taxes and sales taxes are the two drivers
That's right.
for state revenue. Have there been any, range of potential outcomes on what that might look like for the year floated at this point, or are people still just trying to get their, bearings on what's happening immediately?
I think people are still trying to get their bearings on what's going to happen. We haven't really received any projections from the state. Stephen Nicholas has floated up to us a projection of what state revenue looked like back in the Great Recession and some scenarios that could happen today if it plays out like that. And I haven't had a chance to dive into those, but we will be looking at those. The interesting thing about state revenue is with the extension of the tax due date, that a lot of the revenue from people paying income taxes will be in next year. So it hurts this year more than next year with that. So the real question around state revenue could actually be for FY22, because if you have people paying their taxes in July, you'll have an influx in state revenue next year. So until April 15th hits and then the July date hits for payment of income tax, there's really no way of knowing how that's going to play out in the state revenue picture. And like I said, they're not projecting, they're not saying. I haven't heard how the tax payments are coming in currently. No one is really putting that out there. So more to come on that for sure, but it's pretty wide open at this point. Does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate that.
Like it's so fluid. It's just, this is a lose-lose situation as far as trying to project this.
And figuring out, like you said, figuring out which tax year is impacted how. If this isn't a quick bounce, then it's going to be a big number.
Yeah, and trying to project 21, I'm just equally as concerned about 22 and 23. The fallout 3 years down the road, it could be just as bad, if not worse, just from a sales tax perspective.
Right.
So we'll see.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else on revenue? Okay, so the next slide, expenditures, I'm not taking quite as deep a dive just because the data is coming in so slowly from budget managers. We really have only had about a week and we're still missing a couple of budgets. But you can see I've given, again, the same 6 years worth of data, 5 historical, 1 projected. But on the side with numbers, I've given you the 50 most current projected for this year and next year. Total salaries, you can see, have increased due to the salary study, the compensation study, and Bob will talk a little bit more about that in the coming slides. But benefits, I've projected right now an 8% increase, and that's primarily for employee health, dental, and vision insurance. I'm not sure that's enough, but it's what we've got available in the budget right now. So as Bob's going to talk about, I think that may lead to concerns or questions or potential cost sharings with medical, dental, and vision insurance with employees. But we'll see when Holmes Murphy brings back our bids and what we can do with plans and whatnot. But you'll see a little bit of an uptick there. I really wanted to talk briefly about purchase services and materials and supplies. You will see that purchase services actually are projected to go down a little from this year to next. And again, this is all preliminary, so it will change as we roll out more information as we're getting it. But in purchase services this year, we have Children's Services Fund money and KC Tech Academy money that are one-time influx of expenditures that were funded out by outside sources, grants, and the like. So you will see those for next year being the primary reason that purchase services budget is down. We have tried diligently to keep, again, the expenditure side flat, if not decrease somewhat. Materials and supplies, you will see a little bit of a projected increase to next year, and that can be accounted for by increases in PLTW programs, early college, and virtual learning opportunities, weighed against some decreases. But by and large, most budgets, again, for materials and supplies are staying flat. If it comes to it, we will ask budget managers to decrease their budgets if the outlook for state revenue continues to be as dismal as we think it would be. They're prepared for that. Most of them have looked at some way to cut that, but until we really know what they are giving back at the end of this year and how much that will pop up the fund balance, we are just asking them to stay flat. So in the end of April, I will have a little bit better idea of what the monthly spend is versus a normal month, but we're still paying bills for things that were purchased in March. So the real tell will be in May when we see the drop off in spend for supplies and purchase services. So it's just a waiting game at this point to see how the fund balance will be affected by the end of this year slowdown, but we know it will pop up. So that will be good to give back, put in the budget, and then keeping purchase service and material supplies flat, then will help out any economic downturn and decreases in state and local revenue. So I know that's not a whole lot on those two items, but right now it's really needs to be a high level since we're working to get all of that information put in where we can take a look at it. Do you have any questions on that before I go to the salary recommendation and Bob can take over? Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate your work pulling all this together. As you know, we're going to be meeting with Team Liberty to go over the salary recommendation, and what's on the slide there represents what was given as first read at the last board meeting. You know, by all standards, intents and purposes, I think this is a very modest recommendation, and at the time, Cindy, I think, did a phenomenal job of just really helping paint a realistic picture with the information that she had, and Team Liberty embraced a very modest recommendation, and then the coronavirus hit, and everything kind of needed to be retooled and rechecked. I will say a very important part of this story is what are other school districts doing? And so we have put out information, gotten about 13 greater Kansas City area school systems feedback. More will come, and this is feedback on the Missouri and Kansas side, as obviously we compete even with Kansas school districts in terms of retaining and recruiting talent. Right now, everybody, all 13 school systems are indicating that they still have a commitment to roll schedules and to provide horizontal movement on their teacher salary schedules. But with regard to enhancements, most are undecided. There were a couple school systems that through their collective bargaining arrangements have made 2-year commitments a couple years ago. So they're committed to the enhancements that they adopted last year. But as for everyone else, those conversations are still being had. We don't have any enhancements built into this recommendation other than implementing line 4 from last year's salary recommendation with regard to the CBIZ study. We decided last year, as you recall, to only do a uniform 2% enhancement across the board. And when CBIZ recommended a greater than 2% enhancement, we just shelved that for FY 2021 to implement in FY21. And so that's what number 2 is referring to there. Other than that, no enhancements are in there. It's just the second year of the 4-year phase in on planned CBIZ column movements are in there. That cost is a little over $250,000 for the CBIZ recommendations combined. So that's the recommendation as it was presented last month. We'll be revisiting that conversation. Cindy will present, obviously, the new funding revenue outlook, just as she's presenting today to Team Liberty. On the next slide, staffing status. This is as of April 3rd. This slide went out just under deadline, so you may have noticed that under the refilling resignations, the numbers don't add up, and that's because we got an acceptance on a position that's going to be presented to you in closed session. That bottom line got ticked down from 58 to 57, but the 49 did not get ticked up to 50. So it is 107 open positions. These represent approved positions as well as pending positions, and all of the additional staffing requests are included in that as well, in that number. So 107 sounds high, but it's not off par or atypical of any given year. And many times those pending PARs do result in holds for a year or declines, and so those numbers ratchet down. I think on the exempt side, for example, you've been a part of those new teacher orientations. We typically see around 80 or so, 85 new teachers in that room when the entire hiring season is done. So these numbers feel very on par. The additional staffing requests there at the bottom of the slide is really where our focus is, and I appreciate the work that Academic Services is doing, that Steve is doing on behalf of the operations leaders to really pare down what they see as their most significant needs, watching for just your run-of-the-mill wish list needs and kind of ferreting those out. Academic Services is also really looking very closely, especially at the elementary level, on some eliminations that can happen, sections that can go down where student class sizes still remain well below MSIP, but can free up an incumbent in one of those sections, maybe to slide over to an area where the sections need to increase because student populations fluctuate from grade level to grade level in different buildings. Some of our buildings are going down in enrollment, others are going up. So right now, those 37 positions that are being considered, they're listed as approved, some are listed as pending, and that's just because some of them just make sense to approve the additional because it results in a cancellation of an outsourced contract. You can pull back $135,000 expenditure on what you're outsourcing by hiring someone inside without that overhead, and it really results in a cost savings for the district. So some of those additional positions, it just makes sense to already approve, but by and large, the vast majority are in that pending status as we really monitor what our funding outlook looks like going forward. Those are the kind of staffing and compensation slides. Cindy also mentioned about benefits. Obviously, we tackle that to a deep level in the fall, but the assumptions that are built in may need to be revisited, and that could manifest itself in cost sharing, as Cindy mentioned, but it also could manifest itself in just tethering the district subsidy to a lower cost premium that would result in a larger segment of the population shifting then. Some may stay and choose to buy up for the current $500 EPO, for example, but most would shift if we move that subsidy to a different option. So any questions on staffing or compensation or the benefits picture presented here? Thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about bond and capital, and Steve has put together some slides, and I'm going to let him speak to those.
Great. Thank you. And so the next two slides basically combine in certain ways the capital work and capital planning that has been kind of in the planning hopper here for several months, and then coordinating that with some of the remaining work within the 2018 bond. So I've listed here on the left some of the outstanding projects. Clearly the largest, most significant one is the Performing Arts Center. And then we're also working, I mentioned earlier in my report, the 800s renovation. And then lastly, the atrium work at Liberty High School. Just to give you some tentative sense, we've known all along that we would likely cover the 800s as part of that bond issue. The atrium work, we had tentatively thought we could cover portions of that with any interest earned off of the bond proceeds that had been accruing over time. And then we would supplement the balance of that work once we received bids out of the capital fund. So that was always part of that plan. And so what as you look at the chart here to the right, just kind of walks you through kind of where things stand with respect to that bond work. And you'll see that deficit or shortage at the end, that 523. That's what I was just referring to earlier about kind of covering any balance off that atrium, which we would do out of capital. So that kind of shows that full picture how the bond budget then kind of works in conjunction with the capital budget. So Cindy, if you want to, or Jeremy, scroll up or down. So this shows you the capital work plan. And just so that you know, for the past good month or so, we've been working as a team to really cull this down as much as is possible. And the two drivers there certainly would be budget and trying to reduce maybe areas within this budget that we don't think are necessary. And we're really using safety and security, infrastructure, and priority learning projects as kind of the drivers to the work that kind of make that final cut. The other main consideration is, especially with the conditions right now with permitting and getting contractors in line and coordinating the work with so many unknowns, is timing that becomes an issue as well. And I alluded to that earlier with the 800s and the PAC project. So there's a lot of kind of juggling and balancing going on across both of these budgets. And so what this shows you right now is kind of where we stand, kind of I guess, best case or most aggressive case in terms of those projects that would be included in this coming year. And if you look to that bottom left, that 1.597, that would be what we normally would budget, that 5.1 million out of capital. What we would be kind of not expending as part of this most aggressive case scenario for capital. So we're still doing a lot of work, a lot of good projects in there. They're all listed here. But again, we've really kind of held back on approximately 1.5 million other projects, simply to save the money and then also be respective of timing issues. So as it stands right now, I think we feel pretty confident that much of this work could take place over the coming months, and feel like we have a decent plan right now in place to make sure that we can keep those options open on the atrium and 800s projects as well. Any questions on that?
Anything to wrap us up, Cindy?
I'm sure the next time we see this, things will be different. And I just wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you how different, but we are keeping on top as best we can with the changes and working through it as best we can. So Dr. Tucker's line, more to come. There will be more to come here.
Yeah, no doubt. Anything as far as questions of the board for Cindy or Dr. Vogelaar or Steve? Okay, I appreciate each of their efforts, and then also working with directors, principals, those assigned to budgets. And as David mentioned earlier in his questions, we're kind of in that spot of not having a full picture as full as how this year could be impacted next year and how that could be impacted. But just know is kind of a thread throughout all of this is having the conversation as we go, knowing that we're working to create a budget for next year. So what measures can we put in place at this point that then set us up for success as we move into the future? Knowing that come fall or next spring or the next fiscal year even, our conversations could turn to what are our priorities as it relates to budget reductions. And I know some of you have lived through that back in 08 or 09, whether it was working with the district or whether it was in your other capacities. If you've not weathered that, I think that's the first conversation as it relates to prioritizing and what potential budget reductions look like. And so again, it's not to be an alarmist, but at the same time, it's to begin having those conversations and just shifting our mindsets in the event that we do see shortfalls, whether it's in the local, the state, or the federal revenue streams, knowing that there will likely be some stimulus dollars to follow with strings attached. That's typically the MO as it relates to federal funding. So again, thank you to Cindy and Bob and Steve for helping put that together, as well as everyone in our system that helps inform that budget process as we move ahead. So we'll follow up with you at our April board meeting with some additional information, as well as continue to provide updates along the way.
All right, so next up is salary recommendations. Is that?
That was just as a placeholder, just as if there's any additional discussion around that piece, knowing that Team Liberty meets on this Thursday. I appreciate Bob for covering that off in that slide deck.
Okay, then I believe that concludes everything for the study session, and we are ready for a motion to adjourn to closed. Anyone?
AJ Bird, I'll motion that we close this board meeting.
All right, so the recommended motion is someone needs to move the board adjourn to closed session, including any record or vote for the purpose of discussing personnel as provided by law, section 610.021 sub 313 RSMO. Anyone want to?
So moved. Yes, moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we're ready for a vote on that.
BJ,
Yes.
Scott,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Angie,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Kim Marie,
Yes.
Andy. Motion carries.
We'll adjourn to close, so leave this meeting and then get back into the meeting with the other Zoom code.
So if everyone will completely close out of this Zoom meeting and then enter into the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.